The following is a presentation of the Six Arrows Radio Network.
On this episode, we are discussing Winter Field Day with Clint Miller KC0JUO. This is the Ham Radio 360 Field Radio Podcast. This show is brought to you by Chameleon Antenna, versatile, dependable, stealth, and built to last. I'm your host, John Jacobs, W7DBO. If this is your first time hearing this show, thank you for clicking and tuning in. This show is part of the Ham Radio 360 network. This show releases every other Thursday, and the Workbench with George and Jeremy release the opposing Tuesdays. Cale with the HR 360 show will typically release the Tuesday before this show. If you did not catch the latest release from Cale, he is back off vacation and released 2 shows this past week. You can find them in the regular HR 360 podcast feed or at hamradio360.com. You can find our show notes and links on the web at fieldradiopodcast.org. Also, be sure to check out our YouTube channel for expanded content not included in the podcast. In way of news, if you have an Android device, look to the Google Play Store for an app called Ham Radio Podcasts. It's a free app that pulls several popular podcasts into one app. Trevor Hollyoak, AG7GX, is the developer of this app, and he recently added the Field Radio Podcast into this app, so check that out. Also, if you have not heard, the Workbench podcast with George and Jeremy have a new feed, new website, and a new name. If you tune into their show, be sure to update your feed settings with the new feed that is live as of last month. For more information on the new feed and their new companion website, go to hamradioworkbench.com. The Field Radio Podcast has a gear store up and running, so visit shop.fieldradiopodcast.org to get your hats, t-shirts, jackets, and tote bags. Use the promo code HR360 to get free shipping on every order. This last week, I presented at the Utah Valley Amateur Radio Club meeting on solar power in the field. After the presentation, I took my PowerPoint and recorded it to YouTube. So if you are interested in an introduction to solar power, you can find the presentation at w7dbo.net or in the show notes. We are continuing the GoFundMe campaign to take the Field Radio Podcast video production crew to the Dayton Hamvention in Xenia. If you would like to support this effort, please visit fieldradiopodcast.org for more information. Last item, mark your calendar for January 17th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific for a live stream event on building a mobile go bag. This is a follow-up from my live stream event on building an HT go bag. This show will cover the components that go into having an all-mode mobile radio in a deployable go bag. If you cannot view the live event, it will be archived in the YouTube channel and on the website. Winter Field Day is coming up January 24th. To discuss Winter Field Day and how it ties into being better prepared for all weather events, I interviewed Clint Miller KC0JUO of Iowa. We'd like to welcome to the show Clint Miller, KC0JUO of Iowa. He is the Story County Emergency Coordinator with ARES and also the Communications Manager with the Story County Amateur Radio Club. You may recognize Clint Miller's name when Paul Cale, W0YR, was on the show for 2 episodes. He referenced a lot of work that Paul has done with their ARES coordination and mobile comms. So we'd like to welcome to the show, Clint.
Thanks, John.
So we decided to kind of have you come on and talk about something that you're going to be doing, which is Winter Field Day 2018 that's coming up July 27, 28. But before we get started with this, go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of give us your amateur radio background.
Well, I got licensed in 2001. Actually, I got licensed because a coworker who drove the city bus with me as our student job was also on the Iowa State Solar Car team. And he told me about it. I got excited. I joined. And I decided to go on the race in 2001. And they used amateur radio to communicate between race vehicles. And so we did a one-night ham cram. I got up the next morning, took the test, and passed, and had my technician license. We communicated on the race from Chicago to Los Angeles over 11 days and on the way back. And I never used amateur radio again until Katrina. And in 2005, I heard a story on NPR about all the cool stuff that amateur radio was doing and said, I'm out of school. I've got the time. I'm looking for a hobby. I've got the license. And I dove in head first, got active with the Red Cross, got active with our club. A few years later, the local emergency coordinator asked me if I wanted to be submitted for her position because she was ready to step down. And so almost 10 years now, I've been the EC for Story County.
So you realize once you get into a position, you probably have already found this out with amateur radio. Once you're in, you're a lifer until you can find someone to take your spot.
Correct. Yes, you do have to pass it on. You can't just step away. And so that's sort of where I'm at. I have no aspirations to step down. I'm having a lot of fun. I think we've made a lot of good progress in our county. And so we stay active with a lot of varying interests.
Yeah, and we had, when we were talking with Paul with the comics exercise, it sounds like your group is the example of how you build relationships with your local managers or your military and really foster that local relationship. It's not, as when we talk about ARES, it's not a top-down organization. It's not ARL pushing down from the top what you're going to do as an ARES group. It's really on the local level. And it sounds like with the Story County, you've found a way to make yourself available and of value to your local emergency managers.
Yeah, we really try to just tell them, what do you need? We're here to serve a function for you, whatever that might be. And so some of us have now become ESF2 coordinators. If you get into the FEMA stuff and the local response, basically, when our county fires up the Emergency Operations Center, there will be an amateur radio operator sitting at one of the named seats as the communications coordinator for that EOC. And so that's one of the roles that we're filling because they couldn't find anyone in the local emergency response community, a county employee, to come in and sit in that role. And so a bunch of us volunteered to do that. I got a ComL certification. I'm actually credentialed in Iowa, and that was the result of going to a lot of exercises and taking all the classes I could find. Lots of days off of work to take those, but it was worthwhile, and I think I'm one of 20 in the state of Iowa that are ComL credentialed. We basically tell our emergency coordinator, we're communicators. We don't have to use amateur radio. If you want us to, we'll bring that to bear, but if you've got a radio that needs operating, if you need somebody to answer the phone, we're here to help you in whatever need there is. And so, like Paul mentioned, we're working on actually wiring the county EOC for cable television. Was one of the last projects we'd gotten roped into.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing is to find where you're valuable and not to have the attitude, well, if I'm not talking on my amateur radio, then I'm obviously of no value to you, when there's plenty of commercial radios. And the key is we know how to communicate and know what to say and what not to say on a radio, which is, well, I don't think we really think of that as a skill, but it really is a skill in our radio communications. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's just being available. They know they have a trained communication resource in us to come in and even if we're just handing out cash radios that the state or the county owns, helping them figure out why they're having problems, coordinating the frequencies and writing the communications plan for the incident. It's just anything we can do to help out. One of my assistants actually took the time to interview all of the first responders that are responsible for radio systems, a local radio company, and he actually filled out what's called the CASM, the Communications Asset Survey and Mapping for the county. And so Story County was one of the first in the state to get done because we volunteered to take that on. And there's not one amateur radio frequency in that system. It's how does this police force talk to that fire crew when they're deployed on mutual aid?
Yeah, it's that interoperability that we hear about all the time, but it's always interesting with, when something does happen and an EOC is activated, or you have something happen, you suddenly find out, these two groups cannot talk to each other, or sometimes maybe they shouldn't be talking to each other, and they are. Yeah,
that's important. One thing that our county has realized is that in an emergency, their system's probably not going to fail by the odds, but it could very well become overloaded, or they could run out of people just to talk on it. And so between those two, they can use us as communicators. They can offload all of the non-life safety traffic onto amateur frequencies and let us handle, deliver this truck of supplies over here. Okay, the truck got here. What's the bed count for the shelter? What do you want to order for lunches? All that communication stuff that needs to happen as part of the incident can get pushed off of their primary channels because it's not life safety, and let us handle the logistics stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's why, isn't that why, I mean, you're a ComL, so you know this better than I do. I've just done some of the incident management FEMA training, but isn't that why amateur radio role is all under logistics? It
is, yeah, and they're trying to build it out even more through what they call AUXCOM, their auxiliary communications, and basically say amateur radio, the CBs, people that even use the mirrors and the FRS, those are all auxiliary communication services. And if you've got a group that's organized and can bring a system in and plug in, they don't care what hat you're wearing. They tell you in the training, take your logos off. You're all just auxiliary communications, non-affiliated. And so they realize that we're going to plug into those systems and provide them the support that we can.
So I just got it in. You just said CB. And so we're going to have to terminate the call at this point. I'm just kidding. I'm sure we'll get a comment about that. CB.
Well, so ironically, when I was wearing my Red Cross hat once, I was in a meeting and we were working on the interstate closure plan because I-35 runs right past Ames, Iowa. And they tend to close the interstate at Highway 30 going north because it gets flat and it gets windy and it gets cold. And there's about once a year they have to close the interstate. And they were trying to get organized to get the hotels and the convention bureau and the local police and the Iowa State University and everybody that would be involved in this to get together, come up with a plan and say, when this happens, who calls who does what? And as part of that, they said, boy, it would be really nice if we could tell the semis where they're going to park. And I said, well, we could do that. And they said, well, couldn't the CB club do that? And I laughed and said, there hasn't been a CB club around here in probably 20, 30 years. So we actually have a cache of CB radios, and right now we're shackless. So we have a mobile that we'll slap on a car, go drive over by the interstate, and we'll run a CB radio and tell the semis where they need to go park. Because if they park on the road shoulder, the city's going to come by and tell them to move. They're blocking traffic.
Yeah.
So Iowa State's going to go plow one of the lots next to the football stadium, and they're going to park them there. There's a bathroom there. They're going to check on them. And so, ironically, our main activation for our Aries group and real activation, and not just a trust, is that we go run the CB radio once a year.
And that is, I mean, you talk about in any type of emergency management situation, it's about supplies and getting supplies in. And that's, I joke about that with CB, but I attended an emergency conference where after the San Francisco-Oakland earthquake, the guy that was in charge of that said, the person I put next to me at the table, and he stayed there at the table, was the guy that understood exactly how long tractor trucks were, what's the turning radius. And he said everything came down to logistics of moving equipment in and out. And if like you said, we don't need to necessarily be on amateur bands to be able to be effective communicators.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah. And I forgot to mention my role with the solar car race. I drove the semi that we had 24 bunk beds. So I also was running CB radio during that race.
And you didn't have to cram for that exam though.
No, it was a little interesting to learn the lingo going to cross country with a CB radio.
So let's, what we want to have you on is talk about Winter Field Day. So first we'll kind of go over what Winter Field Day is and kind of how it compares to our Summer Field Day. And then once we kind of talk about Winter Field Day, I want to talk about how your group is able to use Winter Field Day as a COMEX exercise, and how do you utilize it just beyond being a contest? So first of all, kind of tell the group what Winter Field Day is.
Well, the elevator pitch is that it's field day in the wintertime, and so there's a potential of much colder, much snowier conditions to set up your stations. To get a little more depth into that, Winter Field Day's website explains it pretty well, so I'm going to read that. winterfieldday.com. And the Winter Field Day Association is a dedicated group of amateur radio operators who believe that emergency communications in a winter environment is just as important as the preparations and practice that is done each summer, but with additional unique operational concerns. Their goal is to enhance your skills and ready you for all environmental conditions found in the U.S. and Canada during the spring, summer, fall, and winter. Preparedness is the key to a professional and timely response during any event, and this is what local and state authorities are expecting when they reach out to emergency service groups that offer their services. So that's kind of their objective of what Winter Field Day was about when they took it on and wanted to push it forward. What the casual operator will see the differences in real field day versus winter field day is very little, actually. There's different classes that you can participate in. And so, or categories, I should say. They call them categories. And so your categories are one of three, either indoor, outdoor, or home. And so outdoor is pretty much as it sounds. You're outside, you're in a tent, you can put up temporary heat, you can use windbreaks or other means to try to stay warm, but you're in a outdoor or temporary established scenario. So a park pavilion, a easy up tent, maybe your gazebo in your backyard, as long as it's 30 feet away from your normal station, with temporary antennas. Part of it is you can't use any existing antennas if you're going to be an outdoor station. If you're going to be an indoor station, it's essentially all of that except for you can use a building. And so what we're going to do is we're going to rent a cabin again. We did this last year and it worked really well. We go rent a cabin. It's winter in Iowa. There's not that many people up there, so they're happy to have the business at the county park that we're going to be at. We'll set up temporary antennas, but we'll go in and we'll operate in the heat so our fingers aren't shaking when you're trying to push the talk button on the radio. And the difference between indoor and outdoor, they had to draw the line somewhere. And so there is a difference between a van, a car is considered uninsulated, and that's outdoor. But an RV would be considered indoor because it's insulated. It has a heat source. And so there's all different options in there. Park, lodge, where they have heat and windows and a door would be considered indoor. And then there's the third category, which I think we need to get a lot more participation in, and that's just the home station. And that's a station that is already set up before the event. It's your normal station. You're nice and warm. You know what you're doing. Could also be you go over and operate this club station at the EOC. It could be the club has a shack. It could be, anything that has permanent antennas would be considered a home station, and they have their own class. And so you're more than willing to enter Winter Field Day, be your home station, use it as an excuse to fire up your generator. You get some bonus points if you run on generator power. So that's what I would say the difference in Winter Field Day and regular Field Day are the entry categories.
And unfortunately, I don't see where there's bonus points for ambient temperature outdoors, because when you think of winter, you're like, the guys in Florida are just, they're in Bahama shirts and shorts.
Well, maybe they get punished for the heat in regular Field Day.
Regular Field Day, that's true.
We're recording this on New Year's Day. I woke up this morning and it was 22 below with a wind chill of near negative 40. So we're hoping by the end of January, we're going to have some warmer weather here, because otherwise we're going to go with a very basic antenna setup and stay warm.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about those three designations. It really does, like you said, they got to draw the line somewhere, and that's where I found some confusion in the rules is, like an RV trailer, what is the difference with, minimal insulation versus no insulation? Or like our local club here in Utah Valley, they get a cargo trailer because it has no insulation, but then they put a big, huge heater in it. And I'm like, that is warmer than my RV or my camp trailer with a little tiny installed heater under the sink. So I guess it's kind of like the designation of where you're at, but it would be nice to see, not to make things too complicated, but it would be nice to see, because essentially in a winter emergency environment, you are going to be in some type of comm trailer or other type of system. They bring in a heated tent. You're they put you in the conference room in the county building that happens to house the EOC. It could be anything. I was sort of concerned with that too, and that when we first were looking at it there's this shelter house that has a window sort of, and it's got a barn door, but it wouldn't keep out a squirrel. Mice can run in and out of this thing. There's no insulation, but there's plywood on the walls.
where would that stand? Well, it's got a fireplace, and we could start a big fire in there, and we got down to it, and it's like, that's close enough to permanent windows, permanent doors, that it's got to be an indoor station.
Yeah.
Versus we found a park pavilion, and we wrapped plastic all the way around it to seal it off, and we put a little chimney or something in the corner and ducked it out and had a little campfire going in there and created a shelter.
And you're warmer.
And you're warm than being outside, and it's okay because that heat source, that walls for the windbreak was not there before you started setup.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I would have drawn the line where they did, but they had to draw the line, and they're sticking with it. And so your heated, insulated, as minimal as it is, camper is not considered outdoor, but your buddy's pop-up tent, a pop-up camper, would be considered outdoor. That being said, we operated indoor. We did not work that hard at it last year. We had really Paul and I operating the radios, one or two temporary fill-in guys that showed up to see what we were doing. We slept, 6-7 hours a night, back up and operated. We had 2 hours. We got kicked out of the tent or the cabin, and we operated on Paul operated from a card table in front of the cabin, and there were ice fishing shacks over his shoulder on the lake. And through all of that, we still almost doubled the next highest indoor one transmitter category. So even if you have to work as an indoor station, there's still plenty of competition out there to get a decent score and do pretty well in the contest.
Yeah, and I think, for contesters, for the strictest sense of people that are contesters, they're going to go for the points and the maximum points, and they're in it to win it. And but when I do field day, I'm like, I'm going to turn off the radio and go to bed at night, and I'm in it for the experience and enjoying family and friends. So, it's really like with anything, it's what you put into it. And if this, achieves your goals by being an indoor station, I'm noticing at the bonus points, it's 1,500 bonus points if you're outdoors, but it's also 1,500 bonus points for making one satellite contact. So run outside really fast, make a satellite contact, and you're making up some points that way. Absolutely.
1,500 points if you operate on backup power. And so that's a generator. What we're going to do is we're going to have a couple of big heavy batteries, the lead batteries, and a bio-NO battery, and we're going to run all our station off of those. But the rules allow commercial recharge as long as you're not using that battery while it's charging. And so we could plug in the battery charger into the wall and recharge the battery while we're operating on battery number 2.
Oh, okay.
We'll have a generator as a backup. Just in case something goes wrong, we'll have that out there. But it is the little inverter quiet ones, but it'll be there just in case. We probably will operate a logging computer that'll be on commercial power. And it makes sense in a real emergency. I'm not going to run a logging computer, so I don't need to run that on battery power. But the computer we'll use to key the radio for digital and CW will be on battery power.
So it does use the exchange does use, it's similar to field day. You are using your ARL section, your category, your class. So the exchange is almost, looks like it's pretty close.
Very close, yeah. So you're either indoor, outdoor, or home. Your class is the number of transmitters that'll capable of simultaneous transmission, just like regular field day. And then it's your ARRL section. And so instead of 2 Alpha in Iowa, we're going to be 2 India in Iowa.
So I noticed they have D-Star, DMR. So they are digital modes. So they're allowing repeater contacts.
They're not allowing repeater contacts.
But you can do D-Star and
You
DMR?
can do D-Star simplex.
Okay.
I challenge most DMR D-Star people to tell me when they've last done a simplex contact with it.
Okay.
But it is allowed. So anything that is voice at the end is considered a voice contact. So anything that is digital at the end is a digital contact, because computer screen.
Yeah.
Short of CW. So if you're using your Yaesu radio to do fusion simplex and you find somebody, then that counts as a voice contact, even though you're using a digital mode.
Okay. So you do. So they don't have repeat. Because I'm just trying to think myself. Yeah. When have I ever done a DMR simplex?
Probably not often, but they put it in there. They address the scenario somebody would think of it. The only repeater they do allow is on the satellites, because those are obviously a crossband, most of them. So
yeah.
Other than satellites, and you can make one contact. You don't even use your regular exchange for satellite contacts. They want you to use the regular satellite exchange of grid square and signal report, just so you don't confuse the satellite guys that you might contact, and you can only make one of those.
Okay.
And so that's kind of a good rule, that you don't have to use your normal class section exchange. You use what's normal on satellites.
Okay. And then I also noticed another thing they're doing on the rules, let's kind of wrap this up with the rules, is it's with field day, it's either 5 watts or all, there's the power regulation is, you're either QRP or you're not. And it seems like they're giving some multipliers for kind of in between, which I appreciate. You're not necessarily QRP, which, where I'm at, located in Utah, 5 watts is not going to get me very far in a pileup. But I'm also not running a full 100 watts or above.
Oh, Yep.
So I like having that in between.
Yeah, they've got power output multipliers. If you're greater than 100 watts, you get a one-time power multiplier. If you're 100 watts or less, then you're a 2 times power multiplier. And if you're QRP, then you're 4 times. And they're saying that QRP, I got this written down here somewhere, it's 5 watts normally and 10 watts on, I lost it in my notes, but some of I think it's voice modes, single sideband, can be up to 10 watts a peak. Well, one thing unique with this one, and it's maybe different than field day, but more like other contests, is band mode combinations are multipliers. And so there's a great incentive to use every different band that you have at your disposal and make at least one voice, CW, and digital contact on each of those bands to get your number of multipliers up.
Oh, okay.
And so our biggest weakness is CW. None of us are big CW operators. We haven't really done it in contests. And so that's where we're going to struggle the most, is making CW contacts. But if we can make one per band at least, then we'll get all the multipliers that we have. So that rule sort of drives antenna choice through the contest also.
Yeah, it does.
Because our antenna choice is simple to put up, multiple bands, so that we can, not have to have a 20-meter dipole, a 40-meter dipole, an 80-meter dipole, like we might for regular field day.
So what is I guess we never really went into, what is your planned setup for this? How many stations, what antennas, and what radios?
Well, we're going to run a 1 transmitter station. We'll have a backup radio, because as you say, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So we'll have a backup radio. Most likely, our primary radio will be my ICOM 7300. It is an amazing radio. I've really come to like it. And ironically, besides the receiver, the best feature that we found in that radio is actually the onboard memories of the voice keyer. And
yes.
So you can actually record your voice calling CQ and have it play back. And you can set it up to as an 8-second gap or 5-second gap, and then it automatically fires it off again if you don't hear anybody come back. And if you read in the back of the manual, it even says you can build a little circuit that you short out 2 pins through the mic jack using different resistance values. And I built a little dead bug style box that you sit in front of the radio and you push the button, and I push number 1 and it plays my recorded CQ over and over again. And if I need to jump up and go take a bathroom break, I just hand the station over, and the next guy sits down, he's recorded button number 2, and it's his calling CQ. And that was one of the cool things about a 7300 that we figured out. Field day, winter field day, Iowa QSO party, that has really saved our voices, because you can just sit there all day long, call CQ, be having a conversation, sit in front of the radio. As soon as you hear a voice, everybody goes quiet, you grab the mic, you respond back, you make the contacts, you work a little pile up, you go back to calling CQ.
Yeah.
And so that's been really handy. If you've got a 7300 and you haven't dug into that voice keyer, throw an SD card in that radio. That is really neat. And so that'll be our primary radio. The antennas we plan to run are probably, I bought about a year ago an end-fed half wave from My Antennas. I think it's myantennas.com. And so it's their EFHW-8010. And what that means is it's an end-fed half wave that's resonant on 80 through 10. And we've had really good luck with it. It's 130 feet long. It doesn't require a tuner. It's got a little transformer box that you put at the coax connection point, and it doesn't require radials. The difference being that it needs to be grounded. And that is the challenge that we're going to have with our setup, is getting the ground rod into the ground when it's been 20 below zero for a week. We're hoping that it'll warm up some between now and then, but we're thinking about renting a hammer drill and getting the adapter to actually hammer drill a ground rod into the ground, and then at the end of the event, kiss it goodbye, and it just becomes worm food. Because we'll never get it back out.
So I guess you could dice the spirit of the law and letter of the law and say, is the ground rod considered an installed antenna? And can you install that ground rod in the summer and come back and tap into it in the winter?
Well, we thought about that. And in the spirit of the law, we thought, no, we cannot pre-deploy the ground rod. Because if you read in here somewhere in the rules, it says something about pre-installed station equipment.
Yes, yeah.
And so we want to sleep at night. We could bend the rules. They'll never know, but we would know. And so the ground rod will be put in on Friday afternoon. We've had some ideas about using the coffee maker to make lots of hot water and try to thaw the ground out. Unfortunately, the fire ring is on the wrong side of the cabin. We can't just start a bonfire and try 6 hours later to push the ground rod in.
Yeah.
Because it's in the wrong side of the cabin for where we need to install the end of the antenna. And so there's one large tree at the cabin site we got. We're actually going to operate at a Little Wall Lake County Park by Jewell, Iowa. So it's about 20, 30 miles north of Ames. And we got our cabin up there, and we're on the, have a lake view. And there's one big cottonwood tree that we're going to install the antenna in and have like a sloper come down off of that. And that setup will work really well. We'll use my pneumatic antenna launcher, and you and I have emailed a little bit about that. I think I've sort of inspired you to want to build one of those.
Yes, definitely. When there's a 3D print project involved, I'm there.
Yep. Yep. And so maybe that's another show we want to talk about, just the pneumatic antenna launcher. If you're curious by what I'm saying, Paul mentioned it in the previous show. AntennaLaunchers.com will get you down the rabbit hole pretty far in the type of setup I'm using. And so also Paul is building what we're calling a DIY Windham. It's an off-center fed dipole. It'll be 133 feet long. It also should be 80 through 10. And the version we're building is going to have a 22-foot vertical coax radiator section with the one-to-one line isolator down to where the regular coax connects to that. And so that sort of allows that 22-foot section to be a bit of a vertically polarized HF signal. And so that's something that we had another guy recommend that as a good temporary antenna to try.
Okay. And
so we're going to get that thrown together, and that'll be a second antenna. And then we'll have a few more in reserve if we need to. We can put up a 40 and 80 meter, like a link dipole. And Paul's got his 40 and 80 meter inverted V that he's mentioned before that we can put up on a military pole. We'll probably end up hanging both antennas off the same tree, one coming off sort of to the west and one coming off to the north. And we'll only be using one antenna, one radio at a time, so they won't really interact or anything. But hopefully between the two, we can, work all those different bands and then settle in on probably 80 at night, 40 during the day, maybe 20, and crank out the contacts to really push against those multipliers.
So what logging software will you be using?
In the past, I think we've used N1MM and N3 FJP. And so I don't know if we've actually settled on which one. We have gotten both of those to integrate with FLDigi through some trial and error and field day practice. And so we sort of got the option out there on which one we want to use. I know they mentioned both of those on the Winter Field Day site, and then also they mentioned W3KM, Whiskey 3 Kilo Mike. I am not familiar with his software, but those 3 different logging programs are mentioned on there should be adequate for the contest.
Okay, and like we haven't talked about this Winter Field Day, you have all these antenna ideas, but you really have to pay attention to the exposure of time setting up those antennas, and that comes into play more importantly than the antenna. That drives your antenna selection. Absolutely.
Our normal club field day will have somebody bring out 40 feet of Roan Tower. We put in temporary guys, and he'll climb the thing and hang a tri-bander up there. And working with screws and bolts in the winter is not going to happen. And so if we have to take the gloves off to screw the coax onto the balun, hopefully that's as much, glove off work we have to do. You'll fight tying knots and ropes and get them up over things. Having gloves on and dealing with the weather conditions, quick deployment is huge. And so some of the things that we're sort of prepared to do some of this, I was looking at a list of what we've done in the last year in deploying HF antennas at events. And so Winter Field Day last January, we did Field Day. We went out to far western Nebraska and did the solar eclipse party. We did our Stable Mercury Comex. We were a rover, I guess you'd call us a mobile or a station that set up a temporary location for our Iowa QSO party. And then Paul also did the Boy Scout JOTA. And so just in 1 year, we've gotten quite a bit of field operating experience, and that plays into we're very comfortable with what it takes to get our antennas set up and how much time it's going to take. And so that is huge. The blue sky days help a lot in these cold weather. Hurry it up and let's go inside and warm up. Let's go stand by the bonfire. And so we'll probably have 2 antennas that will shoot the tennis ball cannon twice to put 2 right lines up over the tree. We'll pull them out. We might have to throw something over the small tree to hold the far end. We may use a military pole if we decide we want to hold one end up, but we're really trying to keep it simple and not get crazy with different setups that require a lot of installation or assembly.
Yeah, and that's the thing with, we say when field radio, I try and, when people talk about wanting to do field radio, I says, get used to operating the radio first, because when you put a layer of the environment on you, even in good weather, it gets a little frustrating trying to operate a radio, especially then you add another layer, which is adverse weather. How do you, as the EC, how are you implementing this event into making it an emergency COMEX?
Well, we discussed it at a club meeting, our local radio club, if there was interest in doing it as a club. And I think the whole winter thing scared a lot of people off. So a group of us that are highly active in the Aries side decided, well, we're going to do it anyway. And so we've sort of opened it up to some of our other Aries members to say, hey, if you guys want to stop out, see what we're doing, let them know that we're up there. But it's sort of been an unofficial event in the sense that it very simplifies the logistics of if you run something as a club event, you have to get the treasurer involved. If it's Aries, then you have to accommodate everybody that wants to play. So for this being that it's a cabin and we're going to be spending the night, we've not gone to a full Aries activation. But we have thought about using our state QSO party as an Aries activation and basically be an excuse to get the NVIS style antennas out and operate across the state and use that as an exercise. And so being that our club sponsors the Iowa QSO party and I happen to be the contest chair, that's something that we're going to push this year, is to get other clubs in the state, other Aries groups, to use QSO party as an activation and not just another contest.
Yeah, and that's the goal we have out here. We're going to do a Utah. It'll be a state QSO party called Utah Parks on the Air, but it will be a contest. But it'll also be focused on getting out into your city park, your county park, your state park, and operating in a COMEX type situation where instead of field day heading to the hills, you actually try and make contacts, not DX contacts, but make local contacts in your urban environment. And that, I think, has a great carryover into the Aries type practicing of turning these contests into another layer of experience or training.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's huge that we take the opportunities to get active and set up in temporary situations, because grabbing your handheld and going and operating at a marathon is not the same as, okay, really bad weather happened. We've got a communications emergency. You guys said when all else fails, well, it just failed. Come out and operate. And oh yeah, it's February, and we want you to talk over that mountain to the other city. And so I think that we as emergency communicators owe it to our served agencies to be fully prepared for whatever weather we may have to deal with. And so I think that's why Winter Field Day is a big piece of it.
But so anything else with Winter Field Day that you want to cover that's unique about Winter Field Day before we wrap up?
I think we've covered a lot of it. I think that the temperature and the setup issues that come with it is a fun challenge if you're prepared. And I wouldn't take a vacation to a colder part of the world to try to do that. You want to be comfortable with your environment and know what to expect. And so, get your electric socks. And I have these wrist warmers. You take the little air activated heat packs, and I found these little wrist warmer things that you put those on your wrist thing, and it Velcros around. And so you can, in pretty cold temperatures, not wear gloves and heats your blood. And so little tricks like that come into play when you need to do stuff in the winter. And so I'll have all my cold weather gear with me and hopefully not need it.
Well, thank you very much, Clint, for coming on the show and sharing with us your Winter Field Day. We'd probably like to, we're going to get you on with some other topics, especially that antenna launcher, but maybe we'll do a quick follow-up to talk about your field day experience, Winter Field Day, and how your plan actually turned out.
Sounds great. I can tell I've lit a spark under you with that antenna launcher, so I look forward to coming back and discussing that.
Yes, very much. All right. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Clint, for coming on the show. If you are participating in Winter Field Day this year, drop me a line and let me know how it went and send some pictures for the show. You can reach me at John, JOHN, at hamradio360.com. Cale had a great interview last year on the Winter Field Day, and you can find that interview in the show notes. Also, you can get more information by going to winterfieldday.com. Chameleon Antenna is the sponsor of this episode. If you are looking for a well-built, well-designed antenna for your field setup or even your home, I plan on using their Wyndham 40 for this Winter Field Day. Please check them out at chameleonantenna.com or look in our show notes for a link. For the training item, I thought I would tie into our Winter Field Day theme. I have a jump bag, or some in the emergency services call it a rollout bag. Essentially, it is a bag that can take me from everyday clothes to heavy winter gear. If I grab this bag on the run, I know I have everything in it to survive an adverse weather environment. Hello, this is John, W7DBO, with this training item. If we live in an area that experiences extreme cold weather, as part of our emergency preparedness, we should be prepared with clothing and gear to operate in extreme cold weather. This may be related to a personal emergency in getting stranded in backcountry or trying to operate our equipment in an emergency-related communication event in the winter. We often like to think that all emergency communication events will happen in a nice June weekend. However, the reality is that our infrastructure of power, roads, and other utilities are most vulnerable in the extreme weather conditions. Given this fact, we need to be prepared with the right gear to not only survive, but to be comfortable enough to aid in assistance of others. I have created what I called my extreme cold weather gear bag. It is designed as a jump bag or rollout bag. For those in law enforcement or emergency services recognize this term. It is essentially everything I need to go from regular day clothing to extreme weather clothing. Additionally, there is change of clothing in the bag to sustain over a multiple day period or change of clothes if I get wet. When looking at winter clothing, there are several layers to consider. Just like our gear bags are modular to meet specific needs, our clothing is in layers. To regulate heat, you can shed layers or add layers depending on the conditions. The last thing you want to do is be too warm, sweat, then turn cold from the wet clothing. So let's look at the layers going from the base layer to the external layer, realizing that any of these could be shed or added to regulate heat. Then we will look at extremity protection and associated gear. Last key item before looking at the gear, be selective on clothing products. Choose each item because it is very effective, not because it's your old sweater you would never wear. Each item could be your life-saving item. Choose high-quality, durable clothing and gear. These items can be found at remarkable discounts at stores as winter comes to a close. The first layer is your base layer. This is the layer that's up against your skin, so you want some form of thermals that will wick water away from your skin. In your bag, you should have 2 of these sets. One to wear, and one as a backup while the other one dries. Your next layer is your insulating layer. This is typically fleece, cotton, or wool for pants and sweater. Next, we have our mid layer. Depending on conditions, this may be our outer layer if we are in a tent or a structure or if there is no precipitation. This consists of a vest or a light shell jacket that provides some environmental protection and insulation. Our last layer is our outer layer. This is our protection from the elements, not necessarily warmth. Our lower layers are providing warmth. This layer is protecting those layers from getting wet and wind. This would include snow pants and a shell jacket with or without a hood. As things heat up or cool down, you can shed lower layers, then put the shells back on in the outer condition or leave off indoors. Now moving on to extremities. This sometimes is overlooked items, but actually the most important. As your body cools, the extremities will be the first affected by the cold weather due to exposure and lower circulation. Extremity protection includes insulating and shell protection for head, neck, ear, face, hands, and feet. Your gear bag should have heavy winter boots and also lighter boots to change into when drying the first pair out. All the above need to have multiple pairs for backup when the first pair becomes wet. With hands and feet, not only you have outer protection, but multiple forms of insulating layers that can be added or removed as needed. Don't overlook protecting the face with multiple face masks and ski goggles. To keep your boots dry, have a pair of gaiters that close the gap between your snow pants and boots to keep the powder out. You can never have enough changes of socks. For working with radio gear and electronics, find some thin gloves you can use when you need your fingers but do not want total exposure of your hands. Additional gear you should have in your rollout bag is a pair of crampons or ice cleats. These fit over your boots and provide traction in the snow and ice. Have plenty of heat packs to shake up and provide heat in your gloves and shoes. Additional items in my bag is a bivy sack, emergency blanket, fire starting kit, flashlights, folding saw, compact shovel, canvas tarp, hydration backpack, canteen, first aid kit, basic survival gear, an MRE pack, and power bars and a mess kit with cider and hot chocolate. All of these items can provide a comfortable night in the backcountry if needed. A last essential item to have is bright hunter orange vest and hat and a signaling flag. If you are trying to be found in the backcountry, this is the best item to wear outside of your clothing. In conclusion, if you have this rollout bag organized and ready to go, you can toss it in your vehicle and know that you can go from everyday clothing to survival clothing in cold weather conditions. You can also have confidence that if you are called out to an emergency event in the winter, you can use this kit on the run in addition to your radio gear to be comfortable and safe. I hope you have found this training item helpful. A list of cold weather related items can be found on my website at w7dbo.net. This is John, W7DBO, with the training item. This will do it for this episode. Thank you, Clint Miller KC0JUO, for coming on the show. Remember to check out our new gear shop at shop.fieldradiopodcast.org. I would also like to thank our most recent Patreon, Greg Lane, and for KGL. Thank you for your donation to supporting the Field Radio Podcast. If you would like to support the show, you can find our Patreon link on our website at fieldradiopodcast.org. Also, once again, thank you for Chameleon Antenna for sponsoring this episode. As always, please send me your comments, feedback, and show ideas to John, JOHN, at hamradio360.com. 73.